Welcome to For Book Lovers Only Live Radio, where we discuss amazing books written by talented authors. For Book Lovers Only Live Radio is a proud member of the Village Connector Media Network. If you love books, we have a home for you. Now time for your host and chief book lover, Rob Brown.
Hello, book lovers and book fans, and welcome to For Book Lovers Only Live Radio, where if you love books, we have a home for you. Thank you so much for stopping by. My name is Rob Brown, your internet radio host and chief book lover. So excited that you have decided to join us today. I'm particularly honored today to have in our studios a distinguished military veteran and author as our guest, Mike Farlow, who will be discussing his science fiction series, The Host Saga. But before we dive in, I want to cordially invite you to join our Book Lovers Club. It's free and it has some great perks for members to keep you posted about great new books, new authors, and special book buying opportunities not available to the public. It's simple. Just go to www.forbookloversonly.com and enter your name and email address, and you're a member instantly. So don't hesitate. Please join today. Now, our guest author is a U.S. Naval Academy graduate and retired naval combat pilot who has held senior staff positions in Washington, D.C. And after his military service, he served in various capacities in aerospace systems engineering in several Fortune 500 companies. His book series, The Host Saga, covers the adventures of Van Childs in 3 books: Future Discovered, Immortal Guardian, and Search for Help. His name is Mike Farlow, and he's in our studios today. Mike, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you. Enjoy being here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. I find your background very intriguing as a naval combat pilot. First of all, thank you so much for your service, but tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, after graduating from the Naval Academy, I had the opportunity to go to flight training and so forth. It was a fun experience as a fledgling pilot. I thought I was going to fly at the time. The Navy had some single-engine combat aircraft called SPADs, and that's where the direction I was headed. And then they retired those, and so I couldn't do that. So I said, okay, what do I want to do next? And I was getting bored flying around in fixed-wing aircraft, and I was eating peanut butter crackers and so forth. And so I said, I want something that's going to be more challenging, and I chose helicopters. And then my combat experience was in Vietnam. I had 635 combat missions, flying helicopter gunships, which was an experience in itself. We flew in groups of 2, and over the course of the year, I got to understand combat from the point of view of an aircraft anyway. I had one experience on the ground, but I won't talk about that right now. Then when I got out, I used my aerospace experience, and I have a master's in systems engineering. I went to work for the very first time in a company that was developing low observable things, making things invisible. And as a seed for science fiction, I think that it's interesting to know what can be done, and then the speculation of what can be done in the future. So we did quite a bit of work in that area. Then I went on to some other companies where I did either computer work or designing aircraft, some of which had stealth characteristics. And I also got into, later on, still staying in engineering, maintenance and support of those kinds of things. So I think that my flight experience, even my government experience, and then my experience in industry gave me a lot of tools to use in the expression of science fiction.
That's some really, really amazing expertise that you have in aerospace engineering. Now, as far as you being an author, you've written nonfiction work before. So what motivated you to write fiction and to write the Host Saga?
Well, that's a good question. One I've asked myself several times, because fiction, I found out, is much more difficult than nonfiction. Nonfiction is pretty straightforward. Outlines are simple. You used your regular sources. It was like my PhD work. It was fairly straightforward and easy to do, a little time-consuming. But fiction, on the other hand, requires a whole lot more. I mean, I don't think I had the grasp when I started on how characters play in fiction and how conflict is derived in fiction. I was really lucky. I had an idea about what I wanted to do, and that was the seed for Future Discovered. And I started writing, and I got about 30,000 words done. And then I went to a workshop sponsored by Bob Mayer, New York Times bestselling author, and his wife, Deb. And I realized how far off base I was. And so I went back, threw away all that, and started over again. But I really had, I think, a lot of help from those two people. And some of the people I met in the workshops. There's a romance writer known as Liz O'Connor, who continues to help me along. I don't write romance books, but she's been really helpful in the writing process. So getting started had a kernel of an idea, thought it might be easy, only to find out it wasn't easy, but I kept going at it.
So you initially wrote 30,000 words and then just kind of started over?
Yeah, I sat with a table of people, including Bob, and I had to give a little session on what I was doing and so forth. And their noses kind of crinkled up and said, "Nah, that's not going to work. You've got to do it in a different way." Not that the basic concept of the story changed, but how I did it and how I approached the subsequent chapters and even the subsequent books changed a lot. So when I say I threw away everything, I didn't throw away the idea. I just learned to present it differently.
And that's how you approached Future Discovered.
Learning, getting interested in science fiction and having some help is one thing. How I approached Future Discovered, probably a little different than some people approach things. And maybe in retrospect I might have done it differently. It doesn't start out as with some incredible war scene or some massive struggle. I took the point of view as if I were to discover some foreign technology, how would I grasp it? How would I deal with it? First of all, how would I find it? How would I get into gain access to it? And then what would I do with it? So I tried to approach it from the point of view of, actually my point of view. What would happen if I was in this position? And I still, that's the premise through which the series goes. Would I do that again today? I'm not sure. I had the good fortune to have some friends look at it when I was done, and I rewrote the first 3 chapters so that it was a little more action-oriented, less admiring the trees in Arizona, those kinds of things, to make it a little bit better. So it told the story I wanted to tell and got me launched into this.
Well, we're excited about this series and particularly learning more about Van Childs. Tell us about Van Childs.
Van is a mixture of other people. It's some of me in it. There are some of other people in it. One of my influences in this book, I learned later. I read some David Weber books some time ago, and one of them, the beginning of this series, was called On Armageddon Reef. And while I didn't think of it at the time, I realized that the seed of what I was doing was probably generated through David Weber's book in that series. So I had to have a character, and like I say, it was an amalgam of me, amalgam of friends of mine, people that I was aware of, kind of all smushed together. And some people that read the book that are friends of mine, they recognize people in it. The name of one of the Van is a name of a guy. Happens to be the first name of a guy I was roommates with in flight school and some other places. And he came up to me one time and he says, "This starts out with a guy named Van Character. Is there any linkage, like to him?" And I said, "Maybe." There actually was. There's a name that I chose to use in that regard. So the characters all have some basis in somebody or something, or somebody that I knew or was aware of, or so forth. Because somebody once told me you have to write about things that you know, and the people that I knew I could draw upon, I used as a basis, not a full character thing, because they're still fictional characters. But I would draw and make an amalgam out of things. I think other people do something similar.
So Van starts out. Now this takes place in Arizona, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and he finds alien technology.
Yeah, he's a kind of reluctant hero. He was an aerospace engineer, okay, and a former pilot. If that sounds interesting.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
And he was living in San Diego and was a little tired of the city life, and was looking for a place to kind of go and be quiet. And among the places he looked was the mountain area in northern Arizona, and I think it's around the Flagstaff area. But he was drawn to a particular place, and he wasn't sure why. And the story starts off by him going to this location and deciding, yeah, this is what I want, and not knowing why, he actually buys it. And then he starts exploring it, and then stumbles onto this technology through a kind of a quirk that he wasn't aware of. He, as it turns out, was an advanced form of human. That is, his cranial structure and his brain structure was different, which allowed him to gain access to the site itself. Otherwise, other people who might have tried getting into it could not have done it. But unbeknownst to him, he kind of stumbled into it and didn't know why, and then found it, and was amazed and annoyed to find out that there was a caretaker in there, an artificial intelligence that controlled everything, and wanted him to eventually take it all over. And he says, nope, that's not what I want to do. I came up here to relax and have a good time, and I didn't come up here to do this other stuff. I don't want to do it. So essentially the caretaker kind of blackmails him, because he finds out that he has Lou Gehrig's disease, or at least the beginning of it, and the AI says, I can fix that, but you have to work with me for a year before I'll do that. And so he reluctantly, he doesn't really want to do it, says so many times, but he buys into it just to say, okay, if I can get out of it in a year and there was no strings attached, then it's fine. So it's not something he wanted to do. He stumbled into it. Turned out to be a much bigger deal than he thought. And so he had to learn a great deal, not only about himself, but about the technology and its implications to human beings. When you have advanced technology, you can't just put it on the market and maintain the stability of society. So he had to figure out a way to do that. And then he had to figure out a way to test it, and that's kind of what he does in the second half of the book, is testing it in some way to see how it works, how we can explore it, and so forth. As a science fiction book and a space book, he doesn't get much space experience in book one, but he learns about the technology. He learns how to use it, becomes more familiar with it, and learns a lot from the AI, which he calls Harry. So,
well, it sounds like this book, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like this book has a pretty good mix of talking about science and technology and the character development and the emotional development of Van Childs with regards to the Lou Gehrig's disease, and how do you present this technology just to human beings? How are you able to balance that?
Well, it's a little bit by trial and error, and also the help of others, Bob Mayer and Deb, his wife, being among them. I would propose a series of chapters and show them to some people, including my editor, Tammy Slayer, and they said, "Oh, that's not going to work." So I had a lot of help in trying to bring out Van's character. He's an introvert, he's pretty plain spoken, nothing special in that regard, except that he has this capacity, this brain capacity that he wasn't even aware of. So I had to have some help to get through this, and I think any author who is starting as a debut author, which that book was for me, depends a great deal on other people.
And what type of feedback have you gotten from science fiction fans that read books like science fiction books all the time that
Right.
read Future Discovered for the first time?
Generally speaking, they've been very good. I'd be lying if I didn't say that amongst the reviews there wasn't a one or a two. There were actually two of those, but I was actually surprised. I was afraid that when it went out, everybody would hate it, but as it turns out, they actually like it, and which makes me feel better because it was a lot of work getting that first one out. I get notes from some of the fans, sometimes on my Facebook page, sometimes on Goodreads, saying when's the next one coming out and that sort of thing. So that's encouraging.
Now, without giving away too much, how do things progress in the series, especially for the characters, the Guardians? And you have two more books after Future Discovered.
So far, yes.
So far, Immortal Guardian and Search for Help.
Right.
Can I touch upon how the series progresses in those two books?
Yeah. Once again, I took the approach, especially going into Immortal Guardian, that he was still a kind of reluctant person. He was still learning about all of the technology, and he hasn't been exposed to all of it yet. He gets exposed to more of it in the second book, in Immortal Guardian. And in Immortal Guardian, he discovers, it's explained to him what his brain structure really is, and that to accomplish the preparation for this enemy called the Archon, it may take a long time, and in order for him to do that, his life would have to be extended. And through micro technology and some other things, his life is therefore extended. It had already started out in that first year, and he didn't realize it, and he was a little miffed at that. So that the term Immortal Guardian implies not necessarily a complete lifespan without end, a long time. And then, so he's given the task then of being the guardian of the human race and preparing for the Archon, which he wasn't too happy about, but was again persuaded to do that. And he gets his first taste of space outside of Earth when he discovers there's a whole new amount of technology on the moon, and so there's going back and forth, and there is even first contact with the Archon, which was unexpected. So that's kind of a look into Immortal Guardian. In the third book in the series, Search for Help, he suddenly realizes he can't get there from here. I mean, he can't put together, he can't build the ships, he can't do the things that he needs to do with the resources that he has, Earth's resources or anybody else's resources, because it's just not mathematically not working. So in Search, he takes kind of a brave step and takes a trip to the nearest star section looking for help, runs into problems along the way, runs into a bunch of other problems that I won't go into because it gives away the story,
Right.
And comes to grips with apparently human life elsewhere, and why it was that way and so forth. So that sets the basis for the fourth book in the series, which will be called New Horizons, and that's just started. So he goes from not knowing a thing in Future Discovered, being reluctant about taking on this role that he really doesn't want to, but he's persuaded, so to speak, to eventually learning how to use it, taking his first little baby steps into spaceflight and a little bit of combat, and then in the third book, fully blown space exploration, dealing with other societies and the problems that they bring along.
Now, I imagine your background as a combat pilot, aerospace systems engineering, has given you somewhat of an advantage in writing a science fiction book of this nature. How would you say that it's really helped you as opposed to someone who may not have that type of background?
Well, one of the things that my editor pointed out is that I do a good job in combat scenes. Well, okay. Space combat's a little bit different than combat here on Earth, but you have a certain amount of insight, and it helps in the development of those scenes. It also, in the idea of tactics and what's the other person doing, those kinds of things all come from the combat experience. The engineering experience that I had was really very helpful with regard to how things work or should work or could work into the future. It allowed me, if I didn't know something, I was fairly easy for me to find out the things I needed to know and say, oh, that makes sense, and go on. And then in a couple of places, I actually invented a few things based upon basic engineering principles. So I think that the combat experience helped. The engineering background in science helps. And also, I read a lot of science fiction. For those people who are going to be writers in a certain genre, everybody tells them read a lot. You don't tell them necessarily how to read it, but it helps when you become familiar with the problems in space because of size, for example. I mean, the distance is light years is a phenomenal distance compared to just a few miles. So reading a lot of science fiction was another great help.
And in writing the Host Saga, what personally have you learned?
That fiction is still a very difficult art to master. To really define characters so that they come alive to people is probably one of the biggest challenges. It's not just about going on with a series of events, telling people in a story what's happening. People want to know about the individual characters. They want to know how they're feeling. They want to know some of the, as they say, the backstory about how growing up made a difference to them. In Van Child's case, his parents were both killed in an automobile accident some time ago, and he was a kind of an introverted person. So bringing those things out and describing a situation is not just saying he was in a room talking to somebody. It's describing the room and what was going on. So those things are things that, if you're really into it, become much more important in telling a story. So storytelling is different.
So we have Future Discovered, Immortal Guardian, and Search for Help. What's next?
The book 4 is going to be called New Horizons. For a variety of reasons. It's the name of the ship, but it's also meant to be what it sounds like. New horizons, a new adventure in new places where there are different threats, different challenges. Still trying to amass the support and technology that will be necessary to combat the Archon, who have already shown themselves 3 times by then, and they're incredibly dangerous. And the Guardian Force, the Earth, and even a place called the Armenian Federation that he found are not ready. So he's looking for more stuff.
Well, we are really excited about what happens with Van Childs and his further adventures, and I'm sure that our listeners and our viewers are as well. I want to make sure that they have your contact information so that they can stay up to date about Van Childs and the Host Saga series. Your contact information is michaeljfarlow.com. Your email address is mike@michaeljfarlow.com. They can find you on Facebook as well at Michael J. Farlow / and Twitter at Mike_Farlow67. Mike, thanks so much for stopping by.
Well, thank you.
We
for
definitely
the opportunity.
Thank you. We definitely want to stay abreast of Van Childs and his further adventures in the Host Saga series, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for tuning in. It's the Host Saga Series, Future Discovered, Immortal Guardian, and Search for Help, available at www.forbookloversonly.com. That's www.forbookloversonly.com. We are out of time, but we look forward to spending time with you again in the near future. My name is Rob Brown, your internet radio host and chief book lover, and this is For Book Lovers Only Live Radio, where if you love books, we have a home for you. Take care. I'll see you next time.